Residential blocks were targeted, residential homes have been targeted, and the death toll is simply unfathomable. Almost 500 people killed, the single deadliest day of fighting this war and since the Civil War started. And nearly 100 of those killed were women and children.
It is thought to be the most deadly day in Lebanon for 20 years. The Lebanese Health Ministry says nearly 500 people died. Many more fled the south in response to warnings from Israel. This is, of course, after those Israeli airstrikes on Lebanon. Let's try to find out what is happening this morning. Will Christou is a journalist in Beirut. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Can you tell us the timeline of these airstrikes and the geography of them?
Yes, so yesterday morning, residents in Lebanon started receiving messages, a pre-recorded call in Arabic, warning them to evacuate their homes and to distance themselves from any Hezbollah installations. This was all over the country. In Beirut, 2 government ministers received these messages, so they were seemingly random. Shortly after that, bombing in Lebanon's south started. And at first, it was difficult to know how this might be different from previous rounds of bombing in Israel. In Lebanon, there's been, almost 12 months of fighting, but it quickly became clear that this was not like previous days. Bombing was all over. It was ferocious, and it quickly displaced people in a way that we haven't seen yet. There's been, up until now, there's been traffic from Sur, which is 2 hours away from Lebanon's capital, all the way up to Beirut. People have been stuck for hours trying to flee the bombings. In Beirut, they've opened up shelters for the displaced for the first time, and all over the country, people are offering up their homes and accommodations for those who have fled fighting.
So, have they or have they not targeted Beirut, or is it likely that they will?
So yesterday there was one airstrike on Beirut in the southern suburbs of Dahieh, in which Israel said they were targeting Ali Karaki, a senior leader of Hezbollah, the third in command for the military wing. But Hezbollah has denied that he was injured in the attack, saying he's still alive and well.
And what kind of targets are they? Because the warning was for residents to move away from Hezbollah installations. What exactly does that mean? And would residential blocks be targeted too?
So Israel released a video message. The spokesperson, Avikai Adre, released a message showing an animated illustration of Hezbollah hiding weapons in people's homes. He says they're doing this all over. And he said you should distance yourself from any homes that have Hezbollah weapons in them. Now, average people don't know where Hezbollah hides their weapons. They have no idea. So human rights experts were criticizing the message, saying there's no reasonable way for someone to know whether they're close to a Hezbollah installation or not. And indeed, residential blocks were targeted, residential homes have been targeted, and the death toll is simply unfathomable. Almost 500 people killed, the single deadliest day of fighting this war and since the Civil War started. And nearly 100 of those killed were women and children.
And those figures that you gave there, what's your information about how Israel perceive those statistics? Because we know that, for example, in Gaza, they say that these figures are provided by the Hamas-run health ministry. Therefore, we don't believe them. These are provided obviously by the Lebanese government. Is part of the government made up of Hezbollah? Does that lead to any credibility issues when it comes to Israel or not?
I'm sure in the coming days, Israel will find some credibility issues. The Ministry of Health is run by Firas al-Abyad, who was the head of Lebanon's largest public hospital, or the Hariri Hospital. He's not affiliated with Hezbollah. It's true that Hezbollah runs certain government ministries and that they're involved with the government. The health ministry is not one of them. This war is unique in the sense that everyone has a phone and there's social media. You can see people when an airstrike happens, people immediately go out to film it. And the amount of videos we've seen of bombing taking place, oftentimes in populated areas over the last day, is it's just mind-boggling. And we don't know. It's true, we don't know how many of those killed yesterday were civilians versus fighters, but the impact on civilians is undeniable. And the UN peacekeepers in Lebanon, UNIFIL, issued what was sort of an unusually strong, stern-worded statement yesterday, urging Israel to remember that attacks on civilians are violations of international humanitarian law and potentially war crimes.
Hezbollah was created in 1982 after Israel invaded southern Lebanon. The state within a state has been an implacable enemy of Israel ever since. But are we at a crucial moment in their 42-year struggle? Israeli airstrikes killed almost 500 people last night, according to the Lebanese authorities, the most deadly 24 hours since the Lebanese civil war ended in 1990. Let's speak to Michael Young, who's senior editor at the Carnegie Middle East Centre in Beirut, and he joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Can you put into context, perhaps for us, why this has happened now? Obviously, we had those pager and walkie-talkie attacks last week. Now we have these airstrikes, which have killed almost 500 people. Over 1,000 people have been injured. There was a lot going on in Lebanon. It's kind of barely out of the news, over many, many years. But just explain the timing of it. Why is this happening now?
It's happening now because the Israelis are beginning to wind down their military operation in Gaza, which means that they have been able to send units from Gaza to the northern border with Lebanon. As you know, perhaps since October 8th of last year, after the Gaza conflict broke out, Hezbollah has been firing at Israel in support of the Gaza front. And so northern Israel has been, I think around 60 to 70,000 inhabitants of northern Israel had to leave the north because of that. So this was always a bit of a pressure point on the Israeli government. And given, as I said, the winding down of the operations in Gaza, they now feel that they can address the problem on their northern border.
So if one conflict is winding down and the other one is kind of beginning, what does that mean in terms of how the Israeli government, the Israeli army view Hamas as opposed to Hezbollah, or Hezbollah as opposed to Hamas? Do they see them equally?
Well, they see them as part of the same broad pro-Iran alliance, the so-called Axis of Resistance alliance. And certainly Hezbollah, prior to October 7th, the Hamas attacks, there had already been coordination between the various pro-Iranian actors in the region. In fact, Hezbollah and the Iranians had formulated a strategy which they referred to as the unity of the arena strategy. And what it held was that if one member of the Axis of Resistance was attacked by Israel, the others would intervene in support of that actor. So once Israel attacked Gaza after October 7th, Hezbollah felt an obligation, to actually intervene in support of their allies in Hamas.
And what they've been doing then is firing rockets into Israel.
Well, yes, what they've done is they always called it a support front. So there wasn't really specific military objectives here other than to keep the pressure up on the Israeli government in such a way that Israel would seek to accept a ceasefire in Gaza. Hezbollah's position has been that once a ceasefire is reached in Gaza, they will cease firing at Israel.
So Hezbollah and the people, the inhabitants of certain parts of Lebanon have ended up. Have Hezbollah ended up in a situation that they might not have seen coming then?
Well, yes and no. I mean, what we've seen in the last week or so is that Israel can escalate to a higher level than Hezbollah. And so, as you were mentioning, I think the beeper incident where pagers were booby-trapped, this was followed by the assassination of a senior Hezbollah military commander, Brahim Ail. And then on Sunday, Hezbollah basically responded to that by firing rockets into northern Israel in such a way as to create displacement inside of Israel, of the population. This was a message to the Israelis that they could do, they could actually prevent the return of the inhabitants of the north to Israel. What we saw yesterday in Lebanon was Israel's response to this. They depopulated a significant portion of southern Lebanon and the western Bekaa. So in a way, it's a tit-for-tat game as each side tries to reinforce its deterrence posture, if I could use the word.
And just very briefly, because it's the obvious question, what is the time scale, do you think, of this particular conflict now, that of Israel and Hezbollah?
Well, I think that there isn't really any easy solution here. The Israelis want Hezbollah to withdraw from the border area to behind the Litani River, which is about 40 kilometers from the border. Hezbollah refuses to do so. So we're in a situation where I don't really see any ready solutions. But, Hezbollah can be pragmatic at times. And given the fact that now there are hundreds of thousands of Lebanese Shia who are essentially displaced within their own country, the party may eventually try to find some way out of its dilemma. But, I'm not holding my breath.